The unexpected return of Maisie to the border town surprised everyone. Her return was warmly welcomed, and the Witch Alliance gained a new member. What deeply moved her was that the welcoming feast was held in the castle's backyard, where a long iron frame was adorned with a variety of meats, available for anyone to take and grill as they pleased. Maisie almost ate until she was stuffed before finally stopping. In the afternoon, Roland proceeded to test her abilities. Maisie's ability manifested as the power to transform into various birds, provided that she had seen them before. The transformation consumed a significant amount of magic, allowing her to change forms consecutively 4 to 5 times a day. She could transform into sparrows, seagulls, parrots, and many more. However, Roland noticed that regardless of the bird she transformed into, her size would increase significantly. Furthermore, there was one aspect of Ash's plan that caught Roland's attention. What abilities did the numerous witches gathered by Tilly possess? If there were witches who could significantly improve farming efficiency, he didn't mind exchanging technology with them. Thus, Roland decided to write a lengthy letter to Tilly. He would first elaborate on the net-Ural alliance between their two sides, then caution her about the Church's desire to unify the continent. Expressing his willingness for mutual assistance, cooperation, and shared progress. He planned to have Maisie deliver the letter when she traveled to the fjord next month. In gratitude for Anna's tireless efforts over the past couple of weeks, Roland decided to give her a gift. He unveiled a burlap cloth, revealing a basket woven from vines in front of them. The top of the basket was connected to several hemp ropes, with a large canvas attached to the other end. As the balloon inflated completely and began to rise, the traction ropes slowly straightened. Roland was the first to flip into the basket, followed by Anna, who was climbing in. With a gentle sway, the hot air balloon lifted off the ground, gradually ascending. Before long, they had surpassed the top of the castle, and the panoramic view of the town unfolded before them. Looking down from here, one could clearly see the rooftops of the castle, the bustling town under construction, the flowing Crimson River from west to east, and the verdant farmland along the riverbanks. The way the border town looks now, it's all thanks to your efforts, Miss Anna. Upon hearing these words, Anna was stunned. After a moment, she leaned back and softly spoke, "My mother died in a fire, and instead of perishing in the smoke and flames, I became a witch. For a long time, I believed that it was my awakening that caused the fire, and I despised myself for being a witch. When I was locked in the dungeon, I thought it might bring me relief, but you rescued me and taught me how to harness my abilities. I never imagined that fire, apart from bringing destruction and pain, could have so many uses." Anna paused for a moment. "To have met you, I should have felt immensely content, but now I find that my thoughts have changed. Sometimes I feel a suffocating unease in my heart, longing for more." After the hot air balloon had stayed in the air for half an hour, it slowly descended into the castle courtyard. As soon as the prince climbed out of the basket, Scroll and Wendy immediately approached him, giving him a lecture and advising him not to take unnecessary risks. The prince made a couple of excuses before wisely changing the subject. The other witches also wanted to try the hot air balloon. Nightingale found it somewhat amusing and was about to join in when she suddenly froze in place. She saw Anna, carried out of the basket by Roland, with a twinkle in her eyes and a blush on her cheeks. The other witches clamored to ride in the hot air balloon as well. Soon enough, the balloon inflated again, and this time Anna and Nanawa soared into the sky. Nightingale stood on the outskirts of the crowd, gazing blankly as the hot air balloon became smaller and smaller. It was then that she realized why she had used her abilities in the courtyard. Glancing back at Wendy, who was looking around with a bewildered expression, Nightingale quickly walked away. After dinner, Nightingale returned to her bedroom, hugging her knees. Wendy entered the room and closed the door behind her. "I saw everyone riding in the hot air balloon, but you sat alone on the side," Wendy said. "It's nothing," Nightingale replied, turning over. Wendy sat on the edge of the bed, gently straightening her posture and staring at her for a while. "I thought you were willing to confide in me about anything," Wendy said. Nightingale didn't want to share all these troubles because it would make her feel selfish. After all, the first witch His Highness had met was Anna, not her. Whenever she felt lost, the first person she thought of was always Wendy, who had never let her down. With that in mind, she gently held Wendy's hand and briefly explained the situation. Nightingale repeated the question asked by Scroll that day: His Highness Roland will marry a witch. Nightingale suddenly opened her eyes and said each word deliberately. He said it himself. And he wasn't lying. Wendy suddenly grabbed Nightingale's arm and earnestly told her that this matter should not be revealed to anyone, not even the sisters of the Witch Alliance. Nightingale was puzzled, and Wendy explained that Roland would undoubtedly become the king, and a king must have offspring. A king without an heir would not be accepted. Whether Roland could become the king would determine the fate of all the witch sisters. Wendy pondered for a moment and asked Nightingale if she wanted to become the queen or continue guarding by Roland's side. Without hesitation, Nightingale replied that she naturally wanted to be by his side. Wendy smiled and said, "There can only be one queen, but even if he ascends the throne, he still needs your protection. Do you understand what I mean?" Nightingale blinked her eyes but did not answer. The secret chamber of the Hermes Grand Cathedral. The ritual of divine punishment transformation is the knowledge that the Pope must possess. When Maine took over the Codex of Divine Punishment a year ago, it was equivalent to obtaining the qualification to be the next Pope. The two judgment soldiers lay on the transformation platform, and Maine recognized them. The guards came forward and blindfolded the two soldiers, securing their limbs firmly to the platform with wrist and ankle restraints. Then a witch was brought in and laid flat between the two soldiers. One succeeded, and one failed. Standing between the two transformation platforms was the highest leader of the church, Pope Oberlin. He wore a striking red robe with gold trim and a sparkling gemstone crown on his head. Maine hesitated for a moment and asked how many judgment soldiers they would need to defeat the demons. Pope Oberlin raised his hand to silence him, telling Maine that he was too impatient. As the next pope, all the questions would be answered in the hidden chamber at the top of the Holy Secretariat. For now, the more God judgment soldiers, the better. Soon, another muscular warrior prepared for the ritual. It was Tak Thor, a member of the Holy City Guards, who knelt on one knee, feeling immensely honored to participate in this ceremony. Simultaneously, a God punishment knight approached, cradling an 18-year-old witch raised by the church. The day before the sacrifice, she had been heavily sedated with copious amounts of Dreamer's Water, a potent sleeping potion. Shortly after, a delicate silver needle was carefully inserted into the witch's arm, and the reddish-brown fluid flowed through the tube encasing the needle, converging into a crystal basin below her. At the bottom of the basin lay a layer of pale blue God punishment stones, gradually being submerged by the crimson fluid until the entire basin was filled. Soon, the God punishment stones began to undergo a transformation. Looking through one side of the basin, one could witness the blue stones absorbing the blood. After approximately half an hour, the stones gradually melted away, leaving the once murky blood clear and transparent, changing its color from reddish-brown to sky blue. The witch's body had been magically altered, imbuing her blood with enhanced organ and tendon capabilities. However, if this blood were used directly, it would instantly kill the recipient. Hence, the need for the God punishment stones to neutralize its effects before injecting it into the subjects undergoing conversion. Even so, this blood still damaged the recipient's consciousness, gradually eroding their emotions and intelligence, leaving behind only instincts and remnants of strong will. The surviving God punishment knights would possess enhancements comparable to ordinary individuals and would also possess anti-magic properties when not wearing the God punishment stones. As the blue liquid flowed slowly into the body of the judgment knights through the tubing, the veins in his arms and neck bulged, and his expressions contorted in a grimace, as if enduring immense pain. With the completion of the ritual, Maine could barely remain standing. He stumbled off the platform, awkwardly leaning against the wall of the grand hall. Tak had succeeded, becoming the 62nd God Punishment Knight of the year. Before Maine left, Pope Oberlin entrusted him with the latest development, a newly developed poison that, when sprinkled on decaying corpses, would have a long-lasting effect on the surrounding population, eliminating the need for direct ingestion like conventional poisons. Without a specific antidote, it was virtually incurable. In the forthcoming battles against the Four Kingdoms, it might prove to be a useful asset. Today, Anna and Soraya sat atop a hot air balloon, marveling at the scenery below. The basket they sat in was adorned with paintings, depicting an aerial view of the border town. However, unlike the previous photorealistic style, this time her paintings seemed to come alive, almost standing upright. Upon their return to the castle, Roland immediately summoned Soraya, and Nightingale confirmed the observation. Soraya's magic core has transformed, and the golden vortex of magical energy within Soraya's body had transformed. It had condensed into a continuously swirling ribbon. Soraya's painting had become more substantial and more vivid. The trees she painted appeared to be over a dozen centimeters thick. Soraya's abilities had evolved, giving her a different perspective on her paintings. Roland thought the painting was more than just pigment, it seemed to be a coating composed of magic. Perhaps it could be applied to other things as well. Back in his office, Roland embarked on his new plan. He intended to use a steam engine to pump water from the Crimson Water River into the water tower and then utilize the principle of siphoning to distribute it through a pipeline to every household, creating an automated water supply system. Lately, Roland felt that Nightingale had been growing distant from him. He called her name a couple of times in the office, but there was no response. Suddenly, an evil grin appeared on his face as he reached for the snacks inside his desk. However, Nightingale intervened, stopping him in his tracks. Seeing Nightingale still by his side, Roland smiled and expressed his gratitude for her unwavering protection and companionship. Nightingale discovered a silver handgun in one of the drawers. The pistol gleamed with a polished surface, reflecting shadows, and both the handle and the barrel were adorned with exquisite engravings. The name to Veronica was inscribed on the barrel. This plan had been brewing in Roland's mind for a long time. Compared to the cumbersome and inconvenient muzzle-loading firearms, the newly developed revolver was considerably more refined. It maintained high levels of both safety and firing rate. With Nightingale's exceptional agility as a witch, one could only anticipate the power she could unleash with a firearm in her hands. Nightingale possessed great talent, quickly familiarizing herself with the handgun and exhibiting remarkable accuracy in hitting her targets. Suddenly, Roland patted Nightingale's shoulder and told her to remember to pull the trigger while shouting, "It's high noon." Nightingale glanced at Roland and asked if it was necessary or simply his personal preference. She raised the handgun, took a deep breath, and effortlessly hit the bullseye. At that moment, she found her answer. She was his shield and his blade, guarding him by his side until the very end of her life, fearless and without regrets. The highly anticipated premiere of the play was fast approaching. As the Lord, Roland naturally had the best seat in the house. In the direction directly facing the stage, Carl had constructed a temporary wooden platform with 3 tiers, accommodating approximately 100 people. Roland sat right in the middle of the 3rd tier. On one side of him were the members of the Witch Alliance, with Anna seated right beside him, while on the other side were the representatives of the Merchant Guild, with Margaret being the closest. A chubby merchant named Hogg, who had already devoured his 10th giant dumplings, asked Roland if he could sell him the recipe. Another merchant held a mug in his hand, appreciating its elegant design and waterproof coating. He didn't want the regular fragile crystal cups and expressed his interest in purchasing some. Meanwhile, Lightning and Maisie were competing for popcorn in the sky. Soon, everyone quieted down. There was no curtain, no opening speech. Only a wooden board separated the front stage from the backstage area. A group of people were about to perform a play on such a rudimentary stage. It was their first official performance in their lives. The story takes place in the capital of a kingdom, in the outskirts of the city, where a beautiful and kind-hearted girl resides. As the narrator's voice echoed, Eileen slowly walked onto the stage. She was dressed in a dirty gray robe, her hair unkempt and disheveled, and her face smudged with black ash. Swinging the broom in her hand, she meticulously swept the floor, occasionally bending down to wipe away stubborn stains with the edge of her robe. However, what Eileen never expected was that May had actually given up the leading role to her. May was the star of the Western Star Fortress Theater and a prominent figure in the troupe. At that moment, May made her entrance. This scene depicted the initial conflict between the wicked stepsisters and Cinderella. Under the sisters' bullying and humiliation, Cinderella could only respond with tears, hiding in the basement and silently crying in front of her mother's portrait. May's elevated demeanor, precise movements, and unhidden contempt in her eyes overwhelmed Eileen with a strong sense of oppression. May forcefully pushed her, and Eileen was supposed to pretend to fall. However, under May's icy gaze, she involuntarily took a few steps back and tripped over herself, falling to the ground with little cushioning. Her elbow collided with the stage floor, sending a sharp and burning pain through her arm. May's gaze no longer lingered on her. She walked to the center of the stage, facing the silent audience in the square, and began her monologue. May was too convincing. Her disgust and disdain towards Eileen felt all too real. Even sitting here, one could sense her cold and heartless demeanor. Eileen was somewhat stunned. May's exquisite acting captured everyone's attention, but Eileen hadn't fully immersed herself in the performance. It wasn't until May finished her act and passed by her, with the flowing hem of her dress brushing against Eileen's face, that she snapped back to reality. The next scene began. Cinderella's stepsisters were going to attend the prince's banquet that night, while Cinderella was trapped in the basement, clad in dirty rags and without even a pair of shoes. Suddenly, smoke filled the stage, and a young girl emerged from it, introducing herself as a witch from the Witch Alliance. The audience displayed various expressions of surprise upon seeing the witch. The little witch was here to help the kind-hearted Cinderella. This was Roland's plan to adapt the original story, promoting the kindness of the Witch Alliance and subtly guiding the people to eliminate their prejudices against witches. Nanawa's portrayal of the little witch was the perfect choice since she had already become an idol-level figure in the First Army. With a wave of her hand, the little witch conjured up a carriage and a set of exquisite evening gowns. The little witch informed Cinderella that the witch's magic could only last until midnight. The next scene began. The handsome prince strolled down the street, feeling bored with the royal banquet. The actor playing the prince was indeed handsome, but his expression seemed too rigid. Margaret commented on this, and Roland chuckled. Next, the prince and Cinderella danced together on stage. Suddenly, the chimes rang, and Cinderella quickly let go of the prince's hand and hurriedly made her way down to the stage. In her haste, she dropped her glass slipper. The prince searched from house to house in the outer city, finally arriving at Cinderella's home. The story had a happy ending. The atmosphere in the entire venue instantly exploded. Everyone erupted in excitement as they witnessed the embrace between the prince and Cinderella. Timely cannon fire sounded from outside the stage, elevating the atmosphere to its peak. The applause and cheers continued incessantly, merging into a harmonious symphony of celebration. The actors bowed and exited the stage as the final narration echoed, yet the applause from the audience showed no signs of stopping. Taking a deep breath, May changed her clothes and, with a stern face, was the first to leave the dressing room. Just as she descended the wooden stairs, a man suddenly approached her. He, too, had a tall and handsome stature, adorned in shining silver armor. He appeared to be a knight from the border town. Carrying a bouquet of flowers, the man introduced himself and praised May's performance, hoping to invite her for a drink. Meanwhile, in the Canggu Stronghold, approximately 50 individuals approached, all dressed in armor, glistening under the midnight. Among the 8 groups, 4 of them carried banners. 3 of these banners bore the emblem of the Twin Towers, symbolizing the Grey Castle royal family, while the other banner displayed a horse head, which Petrov recognized as the insignia of the House of Or, from the Northern Territory. A man stepped forward from the ranks of the knights. It was Raymond, the envoy of King Timothy. Petrov took a deep breath, realizing what was going on. Since the other party was not an imposter, he had no reason to turn away the envoy of the new king, as doing so would be tantamount to making an enemy of the Grey Castle. Of course, this news needed to be promptly conveyed to His Highness Roland. He dispatched his knights to the border town and ordered the gates to be opened. Standing at the city gates, he noticed that aside from the spirited 10 or so individuals at the forefront of the group, the rest of the knights seemed worn out. They slouched on their horses, appearing as if they could collapse at any moment. The envoy's entourage was nothing more than a ruse. Among the 50-person group, there were only 13 true knights. The rest were mercenaries disguised as knights, under the influence of church pills, now more obedient than hounds and more ferocious than demons. This was the key to Raymond seizing control of the city gates. The following day, in the border town, the backyard water tank was already filled with water, and he turned on the tap, allowing the water to flow through the pipes. Roland introduced the faucet, explaining that they no longer needed to fetch water from the well and could now take baths every day. Lightning stuck out his tongue and licked the never-ending droplets of water. "It tastes quite sweet," she remarked. Maisie stuck her head out from under Lightning and followed suit. "It's pretty sweet, coo." Manhwa tried to bring her head closer, but Roland stopped her and explained that the water must be boiled before drinking. "So, you spent a whole week in the castle just to make bathing more comfortable?" Lily sneered and whispered, "Truly a noble who enjoys extravagance." Scroll intervened to stop Lily, but Roland waved his hand, indicating that he didn't mind. Shortly after the prince returned to his office, Scroll followed suit. She apologized once again, and Roland smiled, assuring her that he didn't mind at all. Scroll recounted Lily's story, explaining that she no longer easily trusted others after being deceived. Scroll also had the ability to sense magic, so she would disguise itself as a noblewoman wanting to adopt a child whenever passing through a town. At that time, Lily was locked up in a remote shelter, but when Scroll specifically requested to adopt her, they refused, stating that they only sold adult girls at that establishment. She grew suspicious and had Nightingale examine the account books in this place. It was discovered that in the past decade, a total of 3 witches had been found in the shelter, all of whom were sold to the church. Those with attractive appearances were sold to nobles, while those who went unnoticed were killed in the shelter's woods. However, when they attempted to disperse this group of girls, most of the people glared at them with anger, as if they had taken away their chance of being adopted by nobles. Lily was initially the same until Hakura took her on a trip to the woods behind the small building. There, she witnessed her friend who had falsely claimed to be chosen by a noble and left the shelter a month ago, as well as several putrid pits. From that point on, she became wary and mistrustful of ordinary people, especially nobles. Roland felt a deep sense of regret in his heart, vowing never to let the country he ruled become like this. Scroll remained silent for a long time before finally speaking up and asking Roland a question. Her expression turned serious, and she looked up, glancing to the side, asking if Nightingale was present as well. Nightingale materialized, asking if she should leave. Scroll shook her head, and then she turned its gaze toward Prince Roland. It brought up Roland's statement earlier about wanting to marry a witch, but Scroll wanted to make it clear to Roland that witches cannot bear children. She wanted to know if even knowing this, if he would change his mind. Roland hadn't anticipated that witches would be so concerned about his marriage. He asked Scroll if the inability of witches to bear children might be due to some misconceptions. Scroll sighed, regretfully confirming that many examples had proven this point. Whether in normal relationships with ordinary people or under coercion, there were no instances of witches being able to have children. In Roland's mind, he wondered if it was because witches had surpassed ordinary humans, making it impossible for them to conceive offspring with ordinary people. However, now was not the time for delving into the root cause. The key was the impact it would have on his desire to marry a witch. The first person he thought of was Anna. Though it was somewhat regrettable that he couldn't have children with her, his love for her was not dependent on having children. Furthermore, as someone with a modern soul, the importance of bloodline inheritance, emphasized by ancient people, was not as significant to him. As an individual with his own separate life, he didn't consider children as an extension of himself. Emotionally, he could fully accept the fact that witches couldn't bear children. The only remaining obstacle was the practical issue of an heir. However, for Roland, who had a broad perspective on history, this was not a particularly difficult matter. He simply needed to establish a democratic empire that didn't rely on having an heir. There were many options for implementing this, and he could consider them at a later time. Perhaps Roland had been lost in his thoughts for too long, as Nightingale couldn't help but grab his arm. Roland snapped out of his reverie and comfortingly patted her hand. He cleared his throat and said, "I thought this way before, and I still think so now." He coughed twice and continued, "I still think so now. I am willing to marry a witch." The expression on Scroll's face, as she departed, was strange, a mix of contentment and a hint of sadness, leaving Roland puzzled. He turned to Nightingale beside him and inquired, but she only smiled and turned away, keeping her back to Roland. Just then, there was a knock on the office door. Carter entered, bringing news that the Changgu stronghold had been occupied and Petrov had been captured. Timothy's envoy had successfully breached the cathedral of Changji stronghold. The soldier's eyes glowed crimson, having consumed the drugs given by the church. The leading knight swiftly dispatched the priest with a single stroke. In the basement, they discovered 4 large chests filled with thousands of pills. The knight in charge proclaimed that it would be enough to eliminate Roland. In the border town, Roland initially considered disregarding the matter since a mere 50-person group posed no threat to the border town. He reasoned that allowing only the leader to enter for negotiations would suffice. However, considering Petrov's cautious approach, he deemed it better to keep track of the envoy's movements. With this in mind, he summoned Lightning and Maisie, instructing them to fly to the stronghold and assess the situation along the way. After an hour had passed, the 2 witches completed their reconnaissance and returned to the castle. They discovered that over 1,000 people had departed from Changji stronghold, far surpassing the 50-person envoy. However, only 6 of them seemed riding on horses, while the majority of the remaining infantry lacked proper armor and wielded an assortment of weapons. If Timothy intended to resolve the situation by force, it would be impossible for them to overlook the battle that had erupted between Changji stronghold and the border town. Duke Ryan's coalition of over 200 knights couldn't even reach the outskirts of the town, let alone these militias without proper equipment and horses. Knowing the course and outcome of the battle, and still advancing towards the town, it could only mean that they were confident in breaking through the town's defenses. Roland couldn't help but think of the church's pills. He had previously speculated whether the church, while supporting himself and Garcia, had also extended its support to Timothy. If these people possessed the pills, the situation would be entirely different. It could enhance the running speed of humans to that of horses within a short period of time, while also eliminating the fear of pain. In other words, the line of defense would face the charge of over 1,000 painless knights, and if even one person managed to break into their defense, it would result in casualties for the First Army. Roland instructed Lightning and Maisie to bring Nightingale with them to keep watch, but requested that they observe from a distance. Just as the 3 of them were preparing to leave, Roland stopped them and emphasized the importance of protecting themselves. After the witches departed, he felt a slight unease, realizing a significant mistake he had made in his work. His control over the intelligence regarding Changji stronghold was too weak. If it weren't for Petrov's dispatching messengers, Roland might have found himself in a situation where the enemy was at his doorstep before he even noticed. Once engaged in hand-to-hand warfare, it would be devastating for the First Army. "I'm still too young, too naive," Roland thought. He reflected that after the war he need to work on his intel, as well as he should also place his own personnel around Petrov. Anna interjected, informing Roland that it wasn't the time to lament. The army of 1,000 people would take at least 3 days to arrive, and the border town still needed Roland's command. She comforted Roland, telling him no matter what happens, they will always be on his side.